Well, welcome everyone to the 2026 Serra Philosophical Symposium. We've got three lovely speakers today here in front of us, and I am your MC for the morning. My name is Matthew Gladini. But first, let us begin all things as we should in prayer. So I'd like to call up Father Javier.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Oh, Heavenly Father, first and foremost, we thank you. Thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for this gathering and giving us the opportunity to enter into this philosophical conversation where our three brothers come to share with us the goodness of philosophy, the goodness to come together as a family, learning from one another. We consecrate to you this entire day, this gathering, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Father.
It is a joy to come together this morning for our annual Philosophical Symposium. I am glad to recognize the presence of our dear rector, the very Reverend Dr. Javier Gonzalez. Thank you for opening the opportunity for us to continue this academic journey here at Serra House. I recognize the presence of Monsignor Anthony Eze, our spiritual director. Thank you for all you do for the house. I recognize the presence of our dear Father Arinze Ezeoke, the man who leads us in the pastoral aspects of our life here and community life, the one closest to the seminarians. Thank you, Father Arinze. We also welcome our revered seminarians. Thank you for making our time to be with us, because this is your day, and this is a day the Lord has made. We rejoice and are glad. I am very grateful to welcome our guests. Thank you, dear sisters. Thank you, dear brothers, for making our time to join us as we continue to salvo the presence of God through the use of the mind. Welcome. And members of our Christ the Redeemer Catholic Church here present, we are saying thank you. Those who work in the vocation office, please thank you. Thank you for all you do. Our dear Cecilia and our dear Joe, gracias. And Ascensia, we thank our dear Father Hal, the vocation director in the Diocese of San Bernardino. The Philosophical Symposium is aimed at deepening our appreciation for the life of the mind. In our seminary formation, we begin our day with prayers, with adoration, with Holy Mass, and we are very, very grateful to begin with God, what we call the food for the soul. And Monsignor Eze is leading us in that direction. Our spiritual formation is never neglected, and we are very, very grateful. We are also very grateful to our dear sister Magdalena and our other sister Emma, who help us in the human formation, members of the faculty. Thank you, because you continue to lead us to appreciate the life that God has given to us, the here and now, Hiket and how we can navigate our relationship with others, with the environment, and ultimately with our God. We are very grateful to our dear rector, Father Javier and Father Rinze. Both of them help us in the pastoral formation and help us in the community life of the community. So we are very, very grateful. But today we are navigating a very important place of our life, the life of the mind, the intellectual formation, an extension of the wonderful grace given to us by God to make use of the intellect. we are here to present some of the fruits of the intellectual formation of our seminarians. Our philosophy program here at Serra House, in collaboration with Holy Apostle Seminary College in Connecticut, is deeply rooted in what Pope John Paul II invites us to do, making sure that we understand and appreciate the relationship between faith and reason, Fidex et Ratio, as seen in his encyclical of 1998, Fidex et Ratio, a wonderful encyclical that shows us how we can always see the unity between what we do in the church and what we do in the classroom. That faith is important in order to direct the way we reason in our world today. Very, very important that we have come to see this unity during this philosophical symposium. Providentially today, our first reading at Mass was taken from Acts of the Apostles, chapter 17, verse 15 to 22, and beginning from chapter 18, verse 1. The ministry of Paul took him to Athens. Athens was the most important cultural center in the whole world. Monsignor made reference to it this morning. And there at Athens, Paul intentionally decided to engage the philosophers that were the Epicureans, the Stoics, the Utilitarians, and order. Those people who feel that this world is order there is. He wanted to redirect them. He saw their gods. He saw what they do. Their gods are gods that only feel the necessities of the body. And Paul decided to redirect them to something more profound. So, very interesting too, as Monsignor indicated, Paul was always preaching at the synagogue. But in this particular case, he decided to go to the public forum. The role of philosophy in the public sphere. That philosophy, even though we may study in the classrooms, go to the library, consult our books, we need to also go at the extra by engaging the culture of today. Engaging our brothers and sisters who may not be thinking the way we are thinking. That was what Paul did in Areopagus. So here today is a little Areopagus, because there are people who may think differently. And we, as seminarians, as presenters today, you will highlight and see that truly, if we disengage faith from reason, there will be total collapse in the way our people live their lives. So I invite you to listen to our wonderful presenters today. In this year's Philosophical Symposium, we wish to outline through our able presenters the usefulness of philosophy. In our three presenters and revered seminarians, Cesar Cadera, Luis Morales, and Joshua Duran, you will observe how the study of philosophy is helping and empowering our students to think deeply about things. How the study of philosophy is equipping them to judge wisely, think critically, speak truthfully, believe reasonably, and guide souls more responsibly. In the light of this ability to think deeply about our faith, our dear Cesar Cadera, in his paper, Reasonable Faith and Faithful Reason, will explore scholarly St. Thomas Aquinas' proofs of the existence of God. The famous Quinque Vie of the man of the 12th century. In his effort to reconcile the relationship between faith and reason, Fidex et Ratio. The second paper will be presented by Luis Morales. Our dear seminarian will elucidate the role of philosophy in medical ethics. Luis will seriously argue that if we eliminate philosophical discussions and sound ethical reflection, then in today's medical practice, then the human person may be reduced to a mere object of scientific investigation and commercial interests. Our third presenter, our dear Joshua Duran, will succinctly argue that philosophy has a lot to teach and enlighten us regarding the problem of evil in our world today. His study of ethics and his consolation philosophy is a masterpiece on how to deal with the perennial questions of the problem of evil. The questions like, why do bad things happen to good people? What is the meaning of suffering? Why are we here on earth? If God is omnipotent, all-powerful, if God is truly omniscient, all-knowing, if God is truly omnipresent, that he is everywhere and he can control, why do innocent children die of incurable diseases? Our brother will enlighten us in this direction. Our Philosophical Symposium is a veritable testament that our seminarians are standing on the shoulders of philosophical giants, such as St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, Henry Newman, and many others. They are drinking from the fount of knowledge, seen and celebrated in the intellectual tradition of the church. Once again, I welcome you all to this well-prepared intellectual dish. Enjoy and be glad. Que aprovechen al ataque.
I would like to welcome up our first speaker. He is in his third year of formation, his second year here at Serra House. And his name is Cesar Caldera, who will be speaking to us about a reasonable faith and a faithful reason, understanding St. Thomas Aquinas' proof of the existence of God. Come on up, Cesar.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for taking your time today. I mean, you could have done so many different things today, but you decided to come here, so we appreciate that very much. And I'd like, before, also give a word of thanks to Father Ben and all the formators who not only have walked with us through our intellectual studies, have been present for us to whatever truly we need when it comes to the intellectual life, spiritual life, or anything else, and have been exemplary fathers to us. So I really want to give thanks to Father Ben and all the formators here for giving us this space to give to the people, present to the people the little things we've learned and the things we continue to learn. So thank you. Yes. Clap. So today I'll be speaking about a reasonable faith and a faithful reason, and understanding this from the point of view of St. Thomas Aquinas, how we as Christians, as Catholics, as believers in God, can wrestle with the questions we face today in our world of how we can believe in a supreme being as someone who created everything in the heavens and on the earth, has put things into motion while still believing in things like empirical sciences, philosophy, and anything that this world kind of we see around us, how we can blend this together and truly say and hold that it truly is reasonable to be a faithful person. So the question here that I think we should ask ourselves, and to keep in mind as we continue with this talk, is, can faith and reason work together, or are they opposed? In today's world, many have taken the position that if one is a believer in God and a supreme creator of the universe who put everything into motion, that this is simply to the mind of today, of course not everyone, that this is a blind faith, that you can't really prove this through science. There's no physical proofs for this. But with this, the opposite side of the coin would also say that the only thing that is truly real in human reason is empirical sciences. That which can be seen, experienced, and tested by empirical data is the only thing we can truly call something true, real. The reality is, though, that Christianity, and especially Catholicism, which it has a long history, has traditionally taught that faith and reason are harmonious. They walk with each other. They support each other. And before that, we're going to introduce the character of today who's going to help us understand this further. St. Thomas Aquinas was a 13th century Dominican friar, a priest, a theologian, and one of the greatest philosophical minds that I would say this world has ever witnessed. He was born in Italy in about 1225. His date of birth is not exactly known when, but around 1225 Aquinas was born. And he devoted his life to seeking truth through both faith and reason. He was deeply influenced by whom he called the philosopher, Aristotle, who is Aristotle came before Jesus, way before Jesus, and walked with thinkers like Plato. Plato was his instructor, and Aristotle's works, who though he was not even a Christian or a monotheistic believer, did believe in a form of religion, whom he called the gods, and deeply influenced people like Aquinas, who I would consider myself deeply Aristotelian in my form of philosophy. I think it's very reasonable to me, and this is kind of what led me to choose this topic. So he was deeply influenced by Aristotle. He believed that human reason and divine revelation ultimately cannot contradict one another because both come from God. So our reason, our faith, these are things that come from God himself. They're not separate things in two categories, but come from the same source, God himself. Aquinas' most famous work is the Summa Theologica, which speaks about many of the Christian doctrines, both theology and philosophy. He spoke about in this great work, which he did not complete, but still today affects us greatly in many of the things we believe. Within this work, Aquinas presents to us philosophical arguments for the existence of God, showing that belief in God is not a blind faith, but something that can be approached rationally through observing the world around us. So faith and reason are companions, and as believers in faith who are reasonable, we should embrace this wholeheartedly. One of the central ideas in Catholic thought and in our faith is that faith and reason are not enemies, but work together in search for the truth. Today, many people think that faith means believing without evidence, while reason and science are seen as the only paths to truth. However, the Catholic tradition, especially through Aquinas, teaches that both faith and reason come from God and therefore cannot ultimately contradict one another. Aquinas believed that human reason is capable of discovering certain truths about God simply by observing the world around us. For example, through philosophy. Now, philosophy is what we're studying here at Serra House. We devote ourselves 3-4 years to study the philosophies of different people and see how we can use this in our own ministry for the future. Philosophy is the study of fundamental questions concerning existence, knowledge, truth, reason. So this is how philosophy, the study of philosophy, can help us know and understand that believing in a supreme creator is actually reasonable. However, there are also truths that human reason can never fully discover on its own, such as the Trinity, the incarnation of Jesus, or salvation through Jesus Christ. These truths are known through divine revelation and are accepted by faith. I'd like to emphasize that this distinction is important to us because Aquinas did not believe that faith replaces reason. Instead, reason is what prepares the human mind to recognize that belief in God is something reasonable, while faith brings us beyond what reason alone can fully grasp. In other words, Reason can lead a person to the threshold of belief, but revelation invites a person into a deeper relationship with God. And I think that the imagery that kind of I thought of when how the relationship between these two are to us is that our human reason leads us toward the door. So like if we were to looking for the house which we must enter, reason is what leads us to the door. And once we arrive to that door, faith is what allows us to enter that house. It helps us, reason allows us to get there, faith, we enter the house to more fully understand the deeper truths about life and about God. So this harmony between faith and reason has been emphasized all throughout Catholic history. One of the most famous Catholic saints and popes of our modern time, who Father Ben already mentioned, was Pope St. John Paul II, who famously wrote in his encyclical Fides et Ratio that faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. This means that faith without reason can become blind or emotional, while reason without faith can become limited and lose sight of the deeper meaning and purpose of life. For Aquinas, truth is unified, since God is the source of both creation and revelation. Authentic sciences, philosophy, and theology ultimately work together rather than oppose one another. So time for what I believe a lot of people enjoy learning about. It's truly something I really was excited to learn about in one of my courses, and that's proofs for God's existence. Not only as people of faith, we believe Jesus is truly God and truly man through what the scriptures have revealed to us, but we can even know this through philosophy, as I mentioned, and the sciences and works of metaphysics and the natural world around us. So with all that, St. Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologica gave us 5 proofs for God's existence. Much of his formulation of these proofs is based on his deep influence of Aristotle's proofs. Aristotle himself believed in a supreme being who put the world into motion. So Aquinas took from Aristotle and he Christianized it. As I know Father Ben speaks to us about this a lot, how the philosophers of old who weren't necessarily monotheistic believers, their work benefits us today based off the works such as Aquinas and St. Augustine, who Christianized these beliefs from these pagan philosophers and show that their truths are true to us today as well. So much of these proofs from Aquinas is a formulation based on his deep influence of Aristotle and Aristotle's proofs for the existence of a supreme creator. In a nutshell, Aquinas argues that by observing the fact that in our world today things are in motion and have been in motion, that have been put into motion by something else, the reality that things are caused by another person as well, things are caused by different things. The arguments of contingency, which I'll explain further in a minute, degrees of perfection, and order in the world, human reason can conclude that there must exist a first uncaused, necessary, and intelligent being whom we call God. These proofs are based on the natural human reasoning that we all have and its relationship with the things around us that we experience through our senses. For the sake of time, let me explain just 2 of his proofs and how we can see these proofs play out in our own lives. St. Thomas Aquinas' first proof for the existence of God is known as the argument from motion or change. Aquinas begins by observing a simple reality. everything around us changes. Change for Aquinas means moving from potentiality to actuality. For example, a child has the potential to become an adult. An acorn has the potential to become a tree. Ignorance can become knowledge, and a cold room, such as this one, can become warm. However, Aquinas argues that nothing can actualize itself. In the same respect, something already actual must bring about that change. Therefore, if all changing things are being moved or actualized by something else, there must ultimately exist a source of actuality that it itself is not changed by another, and this is who Aquinas calls the unmoved mover, which we understand to be God. And I think this argument itself can help us with kind of the arguments maybe atheists, agnostics, or skeptics throw at us, like who created God? And using our reasoning and knowing that things are caused by other things, we kind of have to see that there can't just be this chain of movers. It must have a starting point, or else it'll go into infinity and never stop. And that itself is illogical and against our reason. So Aquinas, with that, comes to the conclusion that there indeed must be someone who was first, and itself must not have characteristics of being able to change. And we understand that to be God as the first one who put everything into motion and continues to put things into motion today. The second proof that I would like to mention is St. Thomas Aquinas' argument from contingency. The word contingent refers to something that depends on something else for its existence. In other words, a contingent being does not have to exist, and either can come into existence or pass away. Aquinas begins by observing that things in the world are constantly coming into existence and passing away. Therefore, they are contingent beings. They are dependent on something else for their existence. And in some way, it's possible that in the first place, they didn't even need to come into existence. We see this throughout reality. Plants die. Stars burn out. Civilizations collapse. Human beings are born and eventually die. Even we ourselves are contingent because none of us cause our own existence, and we depend on countless things in order to survive. Aquinas argues that if everything in existence were contingent, then at some point nothing would have existed. But if there were ever absolutely nothing, then nothing could exist now, since nothing comes from nothing. Yet things clearly do exist. Trees are around us. We see people passing by every day. Things exist. We're here right now. Therefore, Aquinas concludes that there must exist a necessary being, one whose existence does not depend on something else, and who gives existence to all other contingent things. This necessary being is what today we call God, who we know to be God. So, with all this in mind, in light of the relationship between faith and reason and the proofs for God's existence explained by St. Thomas, Aquinas invites us to look carefully at reality itself. Through the realities of change and existence, he argues that the world is not simply a collection of meaningless accidents, but instead points beyond itself towards something greater. In the argument from motion, we see that everything in the world is constantly changing and therefore depends upon a source that it itself is unchanging. In the argument from contingency, we recognize that all created things are dependent and temporary, pointing toward a necessary being who gives existence to everything else. These arguments not only address philosophical questions, but also speak directly to the human condition. As human beings, we constantly search for truth, fulfillment, stability, and meaning, yet nothing in this changing world can fully satisfy those desires. Aquinas ultimately points us toward God, who alone is eternal, necessary, and capable of fulfilling the deepest longings of the human heart. In this way, we see that faith is not opposed to reason, but that reason itself can lead us can lead us toward the truth of God's existence. Reflecting on these realities shapes how we understand both the world and our relationship with God today. Since God is the first cause of all that exists and the one who sustains all things in being, He is also the source of both our reason and our faith. And therefore, the proper response is not only intellectual understanding, but also a trust and openness to God who makes Himself known even now. So with all of this information that we now know, it's important for us not to just stay here, though. The point of learning philosophy, of even learning theology, of course, is to put it into action, is to trust that this information that we know is something given to us by God for our benefit, of course, but for the benefit and well-being of those around us. As St. Peter said in his first letter, he said in chapter 3, verse 15, "Always be ready to give an explanation to anyone who asks you for a reason for your hope." Today we are here because we have this continual hope in God, I would say that hope, who is God, is the reason we got up in the morning. We believe that God has a purpose for us in this life, and when we encounter others who maybe are skeptical of this or maybe deny it, proofs such as St. Thomas Aquinas' 5 proofs, and showing how our faith and reason are, as St. John Paul II said, two wings that help us understand the bigger picture, we can trust that knowing this and sharing it with others will not only increase our hope, the virtue of hope in us and faith, but hopefully plant that seed of faith. And in a sense, also, it's planting a seed into the reason of others, that God is truly something reasonable to believe. Allowing God's grace and the Holy Spirit's inspiration to guide us, we can trust that our faith is not blind, but truly a reasonable faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Cesar. And now we'll get to the fun part. After the presentation, it's the time for questions. So if anyone has any questions for Cesar, he will answer them, and I will come over with the microphone.
Hello?
Thank you, Mr. Valentini. Brother Caesar, you talk on the principle of contingency. For us lay people here,
Yes.
you mentioned contingency as a dependency on which something else exists. What exactly does that mean for the human person and our existence?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Regarding the principle of contingency,
Right.
how does that apply to our human life here today?
That's a good question. I think what's beautiful about the reality of the human person is that we are continually developing throughout this life. Father Ben often would, in my first year, I remember him saying this a lot, that it takes a whole community to raise a child, to form a child from the beginning. So as rational social beings, meaning that we have reason, we are inherently social beings, meaning that we are dependent on other humans for our flourishing and benefit in this life. Take, for example, the example of the starting at the family system, the family community. Our parents are our first teachers when it comes to the truths we believe, the values we hold in life. So, in a certain sense, we are dependent on them from the beginning to learn what is good for us, to learn what love is also, and that affects us. That affects us in how it shapes our person. Even in today, in a certain sense, us here today, we are dependent on each other because each and everyone has a purpose that affects everyone else. If Juan wasn't here, for example, if you weren't here this morning, you wouldn't have asked that question. And others wouldn't have known, well, I'm sure they know, but they couldn't have heard the reality that we are dependent beings on everyone else. So each one of us are important for the well-being of others. Just like us in the seminary, we are in a certain sense dependent on our formators, on what they teach us, on what they show us, to form ourselves to be good priests. So regarding the question of contingency, I believe this is a reality that is a lifelong reality. We are always going to be dependent on others, firstly because we are dependent on God, and God puts others in our path. And I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily to be dependent on others. Of course, it has to be done in a healthy way. But yeah, I hope that answers your question and how this relates to our human condition. Thank you.
Not only one of our graduating seniors, but also the current president of Serra House, Luis Morales, and he will be talking about the usefulness of philosophy in medical ethics, a personalistic perspective, and Catholic doctrine. Please welcome up Luis.
Good day, everyone. In this Philosophical Symposium, I will be focusing on the personalistic bioethics, which Matthew just mentioned. And what I wish to underline is the usefulness of philosophy to explore a moral framework that sits at the heart of how many Christians, especially within the Catholic Church, understand life, dignity, and ethical decision-making, which is why we turn to the personalist bioethics. Now I would like to start with, what does it mean to be a person? Your answer to that question will shape how you view everything from medical care to human rights, from the beginning of life to its natural end. I wish to begin by asking a simple but important question. What is personalist bioethics? Personalist bioethics is an ethical approach grounded in personalism, a philosophy that places the human person at the center of moral reflection. At its core, it teaches that every human being is a person, not a thing. Every person has intrinsic dignity, not depending on age, health, intelligence, or usefulness. This dignity begins at conception and continues until natural death. Unlike some modern ethical systems that evaluate life based on productivity or quality. Some examples of these modern philosophies that fail to value the dignity of human life is utilitarianism. This bioethics perspective is counter against the personalist, which the personalists often criticize utilitarianism because it can make medical decisions based mainly on usefulness, efficiency, or the greatest benefit for the majority. A utilitarian might support ending one patient's life if it helps society or reduces suffering overall. A personalist would argue that intentionally killing an innocent person violates human dignity even for a greater good. Epicureanism is another framework, that bioethical framework, which focuses heavily on reducing pain, suffering, fear, and anxiety in medical decisions. Epicureanism is all about pleasure. Everything has to be good. And so Epicureanism is rooted in the hedonistic materialism. The goal of life is ataraxia, peace of mind, and aponia, the absence of physical pain. If a life it contains more pain than pleasure, or if the person is no longer capable of experiencing pleasure, the value of that life diminishes. For an Epicurean, suffering is the ultimate evil. In bioethics, this logic often leads to the justification of euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide. If a patient has a terminal illness with zero hope of returning to a state of aponia, the Epicurean framework suggests that ending life is the most rational and good choice to avoid unnecessary distress. And I also would like to just focus on materialism and its role in the bioethical world. In bioethics, materialism is the view that humans are nothing more than physical matter, biology, chemistry, and brain activity without any non-physical soul or intrinsic spiritual dignity beyond the body. From a materialistic perspective, ethical decisions in medicine tend to focus on physical well-being, which means health, survival, and function, measurable outcomes, pain reduction, efficiency, cost, scientific explanation of behavior and consciousness. And the response from the personalist bioethics, a personalism response to materialism in bioethics would push back against the idea that a human being is only a physical system. The personalist critique would say, human person is more than biology. There's an inherent dignity that cannot be measured in cells, brain activity, or usefulness. If we treat people as only material objects, we risk turning medicine into management of bodies instead of care for persons. Scientific facts about the body are important, but they do not tell us everything about moral value or human worth. Personalist bioethics insists that human value is inherent, not earned. It emphasizes 4 key principles: the dignity of the human person, the defense of human life, freedom with responsibility, totality, and therapeutic purpose, meaning medical interventions should serve the good of the whole person. In short, it is not just about making correct decisions. It's about recognizing who the human person truly is. Why is personalist bioethics important? Which is another factor I would like to dive it deeper into. We live in a time of extraordinary technological power. We can manipulate genes, which means to edit or alter DNA through technologies like gene therapy, sustain life artificially, keep people alive using machines such as ventilators, feeding tubes, or life support systems, end life through medical means. In some places, practices like euthanasia or physician-assisted dying allow doctors to help end the life of those who are suffering, create embryos outside the human body through procedures like vitro fertilization, IVF. Embryos can be formed in laboratories before implantation. Personalism states changing genes should respect the person's humanity, not treat people like products to design. Keeping someone alive with machines should care for the whole person, not just keep the body functioning at all costs. Ending life medically raises concerns because personalism believes human life has value even in suffering. Creating embryos outside the body can be seen as risky because human life may start being treated more like a process or object than a person. These advances raise urgent moral questions. Is everything we can do something we should do? Who decides the value of human life? Does suffering remove dignity or call for compassion? Personalist bioethics provides a clear and stable foundation in the midst of this uncertainty. It protects against dangerous trends such as treating people as objects or problems to solve, reducing life to efficiency or comfort, defining worth based on subjective quality of life. Instead, it insists the human person must always be treated as an end, never merely as the means. This has real-world implications in areas like abortion, which is an intentional termination of a pregnancy before the fetus can survive independently outside the womb. It raises ethical questions about the moral status of the unborn child, bodily autonomy, human rights, and the value of human life. Euthanasia is the deliberate act of ending a person's life to relieve suffering, usually in cases of terminal illnesses or severe pain. Another one is assisted reproduction, which refers to the medical technologies used to help individuals conceive children, such as IVF, surrogacy, and sperm or egg donation. Bioethical concerns include the status of embryos, parental rights, genetic selection, commercialization of reproduction, and the welfare of the child. Another area that it's a real-world implication in today's society is organ transplantation. Organ transplantation is a medical transfer of organs or tissues from one person to another to replace damaged or failing body parts. Bioethical issues include informed consent, fair allocation of organs, determination of death, donor-recipient rights, and preventing exploitation or organ trafficking. And now the end-of-life care. End-of-life care refers to medical, emotional, supportive care provided to individuals who are nearing death. Bioethical discussions involve patient autonomy, pain management, life support decisions, palliative care, dignity in dying, and the difference between allowing natural death and intentionally ending life. Without a framework like this, ethics can easily become relative, shifting with cultural trends rather than grounded in the truth. Now I move on to why is the personalist bioethics essential to our Catholic doctrine? Although this is a philosophical symposium, it is quite important to understand how this bioethical study has a great role in providing us with the personalist bioethics that is not just compatible with Catholic teaching, but is deeply woven into it. The Catholic Church teaches that every human being is created in the image and likeness of God, which we see in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Another thing that the church teaches is human life is sacred. The body and the soul form a unified whole, and love and truth must guide all moral decisions. Personalism gives philosophical clarity to these beliefs. It explains why the church holds positions that are often misunderstood, such as the defense of life from conception, which we can find in the Catechism in paragraph 2270. Human life must be respected and protected absolutely from the moment of conception. Therefore, we base our words on the first principles of a human and Christian doctrine of marriage, when we are obliged once more to declare that the direct interruption of the generative process already begun, and above all, direct abortion, even for a therapeutic reason, are to be absolutely excluded as lawful meaning of regulating the number of children, which is mentioned, I believe it's in Humanae Vitae. The rejection of euthanasia. I would like to focus also on how, in the document written during the pontificate of Benedict XVI, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Instructions Dignitas Personae on certain bioethical questions. This instruction clarifies that just as in general, with in vitro fertilization, which is a variety, is intrinsically illicit, it causes a complete separation between procreation and the conjugal act. Indeed, IVF takes place outside the bodies of the couple through actions of third parties whose competence and technical activity determine the success of the procedure. Such fertilization entrusts the life and identity of the embryo into the power of the doctors and biologists and establishes the domination of technology over the origin and destiny of the human person. Such a relationship of domination is in itself contrary to the dignity and equality that must be common to parents and children. Conception in vitro is the result of technical action which presides over fertilization. Such fertilization is neither, in fact, achieved nor positively willed as the expression and fruit of a specific act of the conjugal union. And it also, our faith also teaches the moral limits of reproductive technologies. These are not just arbitrary rules, they flow from a single consistent vision. The human person is sacred, as I mentioned before, and it must never be reduced to an object of use. Personalist bioethics also reflects the life and teachings of key Catholic thinkers such like John Paul II, who emphasized that freedom is not the ability to do anything, but the ability to choose what is good and true. Evangelium Vitae, which is also written by Pope John Paul II, mentions that the Second Vatican Council, in a passage which retains all its relevance today, forcibly condemned a number of crimes and attacks against human life. 30 years later, taking up the words of the council and with the same forcefulness, I repeat that condemnation in the name of the whole Church, certain that I am interpreting the genuine sentiment of every upright conscience, whatever is opposed to life itself, such as any type of murder, genocide, abortion, euthanasia, or willful self-destruction, whatever violates the integrity of the human person, such as mutilation, torments inflicted on body or mind, attempts to coerce the will itself, whatever insults human dignity, such as subhuman living conditions, arbitrary imprisonment, deportation, slavery, prostitution, the selling of women and children, as well as disgraceful working conditions, where people are treated as mere instruments of gain, rather than as free, responsible persons. All these things and others like them are infamies indeed. They poison human society, and they do more harm to those who practice them than to those who suffer from the injury. Moreover, they are a supreme dishonor to the Creator. And lastly, why is this the most essential philosophy in this context? Many ethical systems exist. As I mentioned before, utilitarianism, which focuses on maximizing happiness. Another one that I think I forgot to mention was relativism, but it depends on the person or cultural opinion. Materialism reduces humans to biological processes. But these systems often fail to fully protect the most vulnerable, the unborn, the elderly, the disabled, the terminally ill. Personalist bioethics stands out because it never excludes anyone, never measures dignity, never compromises on the value of life. It is essential because it aligns faith and reason, as we've heard from our brother Caesar. Faith tells us human life is sacred. Reason confirms that dignity must be universal to be meaningful. Without personalism, Catholic moral teaching would risk being seen as a set of isolated rules. With it, those teachings become part of a coherent vision of the human person. And to conclude, in the end, personalist bioethics asks us to see more deeply, not just what is useful, what is efficient, what is desired, but who is the human person? What does their dignity demand of us? It challenges us to build a world where the weakest are protected, the suffering are cared for, the value of life is never questioned. And in doing so, it reminds us that ethics is not just about decisions, it is about love, truth, and the recognition of each person's infinite worth as created in the image of God, which is what truly signifies our faith. It also leads those to adopt those moral, ethical beliefs in their life, which is good and true. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you are enjoying this symposium so far. I am going to be sharing about a topic which is more a series of questions, or a question that takes many forms. That is a question about confusion, about why do people who work so hard, why do people who seem to be just, who seem to be righteous, come home after a long day of work and see that they've lost their home? Or why do kids who are so innocent, why are they given seemingly terminal illnesses or cancer? And it's many events like these that plunge people into confusion, depression, despair, and loneliness. Because they, understandably so, and sometimes us, do not understand why bad things happen to good people. And this is a dilemma that has plagued us for more than 1,000 years. If God is all good, all powerful, and wants the best for us, then why is there evil in the world? This is exactly what Boethius struggles with. He lived in the late 400s AD. He was born around 475, 480, and lived into 500s. And he was a very close counselor and governor of King Theodoric of the Roman Empire. But he ended up being falsely accused, given jail time, and eventually executed for something he was not guilty for. He was investigated and convicted of heresy, practicing magic, and treason. And because of this, he too was plunged into these depths of confusion, despair, and loneliness. And he even wondered why people who did this to him would still be out being able to accumulate wealth, power, and fame, while he himself, someone who was well known for accumulating virtue, would be in a jail cell and eventually executed. Again, here we have the main question that is presented. Why would an all-good God seemingly allow such things to happen? Such bad fortune to come across those who do not deserve it. This is a question that was asked and stayed popular for much earlier, posed by Epicurus, who we heard in Brother Luis's talk, brought up the Epicurean philosophy, which is towards total pleasure. And so from here, we see kind of a stringing along a little line, the fact that someone who is focused on pleasure, not being super confused about why we suffer. And so he gives us more specific questions, and essentially these are accusations against God, which is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not omnipotent. He's not all-powerful. Is he able but not willing? Then he is evil. Is he both able and willing? Then where does evil come from? And is he neither able nor willing? Then why would we call him God? And this calls into a lot of question about our understanding of God. But first, we need to understand what we know about God. And so for this, we pare it down to a necessary amount of like how Father Ben said in the beginning. He's omnipotent, he's omniscient, omnipotent being all-powerful, omniscient being all-knowing. He's omnitemporal, he's eternal, unchanging. He is omnipresent, he's everywhere at all times. And so he is omnibenevolent, and that is all good. All of creation is contingent on his existence, bringing from Brother Caesar's. He created the universe and all that it contains, rules, laws, matter, and he created this from nothing. But this can also create a misnomer, that is, that somehow we can connect him to understanding that he created evil, which is untrue. Evil, or good, can be something that is brought up from, Good and evil are more terms that we associate in morality to things that have intellect. Good is defined through being in accord from which all good flows. That is, in this, we are defining God as such. He is omnibenevolent. But evil is not a positive matter or positive creation in itself. God did not create evil. And from Augustine, which this idea originates from, specifically evil is a privation of good. That is, it is a lack of the good that ought to be where it is. That is similar to, Brother Juan actually shared this with me, which I share with you, which is the idea of the ground that we have around us. Something that would be a privation of the ground is a hole. A hole is a concept that we can think of, but it is not necessarily a positive matter. It is the lack of something that should be there. And so, from this, we find that evil's foundation may be from the good, but it is, again, a corruption. And honestly, this is hard for us to say this is a part of matter, because, again, matter, material, or ideas, concepts, they do not have their own intellect. We need, for something to be evil or good, morality, in the definition of morality, they need to have free will. That is where humans, with their intellect and free will that they were given through their dignity of being made in the image of God, can choose to not employ the good that is given them. And so, this question, by its nature of a prevention of pleasure or an increase of suffering in one's life, does not call into account that good circumstances may not feel or be experienced as pleasure in the immediate sense of the matter. And so events and circumstances can seem good or bad depending on the experience of them, but how they are acted from is the main focus. Material objects without a sense of free will or an intellect cannot have morality associated with them. Boethius has these exact same questions that Epicurus puts forth in the despair that he feels after being imprisoned. But as he writes in the Consolation of Philosophy, he gets a visitor and dialogues with this visitor that we know and come to know as philosophy, Lady Philosophy specifically. And so this visitor is seen as a very fair and beautiful woman. She is dressed as a nurse, and this is the typological significance for what philosophy is to us. And so in this dialogue that ensues is a reminder to Boethius, who is in need of remembering something. One, being the true meaning of life. Boethius, in his despair, forgets what the true meaning of life is in the first place, as he has spent a lot of time in the place of governor under Theodoric, being consumed by the fame, wealth, and power that he had. He had gotten used to the pleasure that they brought and had been accustomed to calling them and the accumulation of them as good. Now that he has none of them and cannot accumulate them, he feels as if his life has lost meaning. 2. What is true happiness? Now that Boethius has come to understand, per se, the meaning of life, he struggles about the meaning of daily life, the struggles and successes, and is still confused about why circumstances are the way they are for him. He remembers the concept of happiness, but not entirely of what it is. 3. In suffering, we are not always being punished. Boethius and many of us see people who are unjust and evil, per se, succeeding and gaining wealth, fame, and power, and then good people, him namely, losing such things and assuming good things are happening to those that are accumulating and bad things are happening to those that are losing. 4. What is fortune? Boethius sums the events that happen to him as bad fortune. But truly, what is fortune? And then 5. What is happening when experiencing suffer or pleasure? And in this, we will see how Boethius regains his understanding due to philosophy's consolation. And so now we try to see, what does philosophy answer to these questions? Number 1, what is the true meaning of life? Lady Philosophy, first and foremost, addresses the fickleness of fortune. That fortune is ever changing. And when someone gains anything because of fortune, they are never in control of what they gain or what they lose. And this is even true for life, especially since we are not made to stay in this life. We are made for another life after this. 2, what is true happiness? Philosophy defines true happiness, showing that happiness is not the attainment of wealth, power, and fame, but the attainment of good. That is what we know as God. It is the attainment of God, but not in our own efforts. We cannot attain it away from God. We only attain it when we are in our own, or when we are in His accord, His plan. And this is not always clear, but we can attain it. It is attainable even in distress, especially the way that he was feeling. Number 3, who is truly suffering in bad circumstances? Philosophy argued that good circumstances to good people can resemble suffering. This is a type of chastisement, and we can go even into the Bible as our Father, God in heaven, chastises those whom he loves. This resembles a type of suffering, and it can take many forms. Suffering in itself can take many forms. But when those who are attaining the false happiness, as wealth, fame, and power are, when they gain more of it, they are not in good circumstances. In fact, they are falling further and further away from him who is good. And so, in this way, we see how the unjust are really the ones that are suffering. They are suffering by falling further away from the one who can give us the true happiness that we are trying to access within life, that we're trying to attain within life. And so when good people seem to be suffering from bad circumstances, they're actually, which, again, this is hard to say, that's why we're talking about this. It's not always clear. But from within, we come to realize through philosophy's consolation that it is an opportunity. And sometimes, again, it's unclear. But it's an opportunity to sharpen ourselves and to provide a better good. And for fourth, what is good or bad fortune? Fortune itself, going to define it, it is something that is subject to the providence of God. The providence of God has everything in the universe and all that it contains, from the biggest to the smallest, subject to it. And so it is the providence of God that is in control. And so when we come to fortune, fortune is a part of the providence, but it is apart from the perfect providence, which is the direct involvement. And the direct involvement not as more as in the divine intervention of, per se, like me moving this paper, God moving this paper, versus something that is a random occurrence. And so good fortune and bad fortune are both subject to this providence. Then what can we get out of suffering? Philosophy produces or shows us from within, again, philosophy from within, shows us how one should act when in success or whether in failure, whether in pleasure or whether in suffering. Again, they are opportunities to gain virtue towards the end that is true happiness. Thank you.
Insightful presentation. I think that regardless of anything, the mystery of evil is a great one, but I would ask you, brother, do you think that it is possible that an evil can bring a good or a greater good? Or suffering, better yet, suffering and evil can bring about a good?
That's a good question, because when there is that privation of good, that evil is, there is the lack of good in that circumstance. But it is still, the circumstance can, again, it can bring about a greater good. And that is because, one, we know if God is all good and has providence over everything, then he can use that to bring about greater good. The only thing that is asked of the person in that circumstance, which is feeling that suffering, which is feeling that despair or that loneliness, is to be in accord with God's plan, to relinquish of themselves the desire for control in that circumstance, the desire to need the pleasure that they feel should come from that. And that's hard to say, because in circumstances where it feels random and it feels unclear, in terrible situations where people are suffering heavily, in times where it may not make sense, how can this be? But that is because we have an all-good God. Not saying that all-good God created that evil, but the evil is there, and it's not necessary for the greater good, but it can be there for the greater.
Do you think that as Christians the cross is the epitome of that idea?
Exactly. The cross is, in fact, one of the worst evils that has happened to somebody, and it has created the greatest good that can come from that. That is our salvation that is in accord with his. In accord as well.